All right, welcome to the deep dive. We are diving into English fluency today. So many of you have sent in research on this. It's incredible. Um, I've got to say, though, 40 different techniques, it felt like a lot. But luckily, I've got our expert here to like help break it all down.
Yeah, it's definitely a lot to take in. And I think, starting any kind of new learning journey can feel pretty daunting. Luckily, though, a lot of the research you sent really starts by talking about the power of mindset.
Okay, so let's start there. I'm seeing Carol Dweck's growth mindset theory mentioned quite a bit, actually. So how does that apply to learning another language?
Well, it really all comes down to believing that you can improve. If you approach language learning thinking, I'm just not good at languages, it's going to make it that much harder, right?
Yeah.
So all of this deep dive that we're doing, it's about giving you those tools
Yeah.
and those strategies. But your mindset, it's like the foundation.
So,
Absolutely, and that's exactly why this research is so valuable, I think, because it gives you those very concrete techniques to rely on when things get tough. For example, one that really stood out to me was Dr. Stephen Krashen's input hypothesis.
okay, yeah, I see that one mentioned a few times. But honestly, I'm not sure I totally understand it. Is it just about surrounding yourself with English as much as possible?
Well, it's a bit more nuanced than that. It's about consistently being exposed to English that's slightly above your current level. So not like baby books if you're already conversational, right? But maybe podcasts with transcripts
Right.
or TV shows with subtitles. It's kind of like if you were learning to lift weights, you wouldn't start with the heaviest one right away.
Right, so it's about finding that sweet spot where you're challenged but not completely lost. I get it. Okay, so podcasts with transcripts, those seem perfect. You can listen, you can follow along with the words at the same time. But it all seems a bit passive, though, right?
Mm.
How do we actually practice speaking?
That's where a technique called shadowing comes in. This was developed by Dr. Alexander Arguez, and basically it involves mimicking native speakers, their pronunciation, their rhythm, everything. I know it might sound a little intimidating at first, but it's actually a really, really powerful way to build muscle memory for speaking.
Mimicking native speakers.
Yeah.
Yeah, honestly, that does sound a little intimidating. Like, am I supposed to suddenly sound like a Hollywood actor?
No, 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 not at all. It's about starting slow and gradually increasing your speed. As you become more comfortable, think of it like practicing a musical instrument. You wouldn't expect to play a concerto flawlessly on your first try.
Okay, that makes me feel a little better. It's about gradual progress, not instant perfection.
Gotcha.
And speaking of things that feel overwhelming, vocabulary. How are we supposed to learn all the words?
Well, that's where things get really, really interesting. Research on frequency lists and this thing called Zipf's law show that a relatively small number of words actually make up a huge percentage of everyday English conversation. So imagine learning just 2,000 words. Suddenly, you can understand most everyday conversations. That feels a lot less daunting than trying to learn the entire dictionary, right?
Wow, 2,000 words, and I can understand most conversations.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that totally changes my perspective.
Yeah.
But what about the more complex words and the grammar rules? I mean, grammar has always been kind of a roadblock for me.
Yeah, that's totally understandable. But here's where another one of Krashen's theories comes in, the natural order hypothesis. And this one suggests that grammar acquisition happens naturally with enough input and practice. It's kind of like, think about learning your first language, right? You didn't memorize grammar rules as a kid. You absorbed them through being exposed to it, through, interacting with people.
Okay, so instead of stressing about perfect grammar from day one, the focus should be on just getting comfortable with communicating, even if it's not, perfectly grammatically correct at first.
Exactly. And this actually ties in really nicely with the idea of communicative language teaching,
Well,
where the goal is to communicate effectively, not just to know, a bunch of grammar rules. Think of it like learning to ride a bike. You wouldn't spend all your time studying the physics of balance, right? You'd get on the bike and start pedaling. You kind of figure it out as you go.
right, right. You just got to get on and go. Okay, so we're building up our vocabulary, we're working on our pronunciation, and we're letting grammar come naturally through practice. Got it.
Yeah.
But I still feel like there's a difference between like classroom English and actually being able to hold a fluent conversation.
You're absolutely right. And that's where Michael Long's interaction hypothesis comes in. And this one emphasizes the importance of real conversations, especially with native speakers, for developing true fluency. Think about it. I mean, you can read all the textbooks in the world. But until you're out there having those spontaneous, unscripted interactions, you won't truly internalize the language, right?
Yeah, it's like the difference between reading about how to swim and actually jumping in the pool. But how do we find those opportunities
Mhm.
for those real-world interactions if we're not, living in an English-speaking country?
Well, luckily, we live in a world now with so many opportunities for connection. I mean, language exchange apps like HelloTalk, those are incredibly popular. And a lot of cities have, local conversation groups or meetups.
Okay, so we're pushing ourselves out of our comfort zones and we're practicing in real-world situations. I like it. But what about sounding more natural? I mean, it's one thing to be able to communicate, but I want to sound like I actually know what I'm doing.
That's a great goal. And that brings us to the concept of speech chunking. And this is basically the idea that fluent speakers, they naturally group words together into these meaningful phrases, which makes their speech sound smoother, more effortless.
Okay, I think I get it, but can you give me an example of what you mean by chunks?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think about common phrases like on the other hand, or as a matter of fact, these are chunks that we use so frequently, they just kind of flow naturally without us having to think about, each individual word. So the more you practice speaking in these chunks, the more fluent and natural you'll sound.
Wow, I never really thought about it like that. So it's not just about learning individual words, it's about learning how to group those words together naturally.
Exactly. And this is where paying attention to how native speakers talk can really help. Start noticing those common phrases and practice, incorporating them into your own speech.
Okay, so we're learning vocabulary in chunks. We're practicing pronunciation, and we're immersing ourselves in real-world conversations. But how do we make sure we actually remember all of this awesome information? I mean, I've definitely had the experience of learning something new and then completely forgetting it a week later.
Oh, you're not alone. And that brings us to the powerful technique of spaced repetition.
Okay, yeah, I've heard that term before.
Mm.
But can you refresh my memory on what that actually means?
Basically, it's based on this principle that we forget things over time unless we actively revisit them. And so apps like Anki, they're actually designed around this concept. And they help you maximize vocabulary retention. So you input, your words or phrases. And the app, it intelligently schedules these review sessions to help you actually commit them to long-term memory.
Okay, so it's not just about cramming, vocabulary to my brain all at once. It's about strategically reviewing it over time to make sure it sticks. That makes a lot of sense. And it takes away the stress of feeling like I have to remember everything perfectly right away. Man, this is already making me rethink the way I approach language learning.
That's fantastic to hear. And we've only just scratched the surface here of all the amazing techniques out there. What's really exciting is that there are ways to go beyond, like that traditional textbook learning and make the process more fun and engaging.
Okay, I am all about making learning enjoyable. Tell me more about these fun approaches.
Well, one technique that I find particularly powerful is incorporating multisensory learning. And this is based on something called dual coding theory, which basically says that we learn and remember things better when we engage multiple senses.
So instead of just reading definitions in a textbook, we should be finding ways to bring those words to life.
Exactly. So let's say you're learning vocabulary related to travel. Instead of just, memorizing the word passport, picture yourself holding your own passport, feeling the excitement of an upcoming trip, that multisensory experience. It makes the word much more memorable. Or if you're learning about food, don't just read the menu, go out and try those dishes.
This is brilliant. It's like turning language learning into an adventure. It's not just about memorizing words, it's about experiencing them.
You got it. And this can be applied to so many aspects of language learning. Imagine you're learning how to order food at a restaurant. Instead of just reading a dialogue, visualize yourself, confidently ordering that delicious meal in
Mhm.
English. Picture the waiter smiling at you. Imagine the smell of the food, you know? The more you engage your senses, the more you make the language come alive. The more deeply you'll absorb it and remember it.
This deep dive is already changing the way I think about language learning. I'm feeling so inspired to get out there and start practicing, but I think it's time for a little break, wouldn't you say? We've covered so much ground already.
I agree. A little break would be great. We'll be back in a flash to explore even more techniques and strategies for unlocking, your full English fluency potential.
We're back, and honestly, I'm ready for more. Before the break, we were talking about making language learning multisensory, and it really clicked for me. Who wants to be stuck with boring textbooks, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can be out there ordering food in English and picturing those vocabulary words coming to life.
Exactly, exactly. It's about making the language a part of your actual lived experience, and that actually reminds me of another technique called task-based language learning.
Task-based learning. Okay, what does that involve?
So instead of just focusing on, grammar rules or those isolated vocabulary lists, you would complete real-world tasks in English.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Can you give me like some examples of what these tasks might be?
Sure, sure. Think about the things you do in your everyday life. It could be like describing your favorite recipe to a friend, explaining your job, or even just giving someone directions. And these tasks they kind of force you to use the language in a practical way, right? In a way that actually is meaningful to you.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like learning by doing
Mm.
rather than just passively studying. I can see how that would be so much more effective for actually internalizing the language.
It is, and it actually ties in beautifully with this concept of productive struggle.
Productive struggle.
Okay.
That sounds a little counterintuitive. I mean, don't we want learning to be easy and enjoyable?
Of course, we want to enjoy the process, but research actually shows that grappling with those challenges, it actually strengthens our learning. Think of it like working out. You don't get stronger by lifting the lightest weights, right?
Yeah.
You challenge your muscles, you push yourself a bit beyond your comfort zone, and that's how you grow. And language learning, it's very similar. Those moments when you have to, you know, search for the right word or piece together like a complex sentence, those are actually the moments when your fluency is truly developing.
Okay, so it's not about avoiding those challenges, it's about embracing them as opportunities for growth. That's a really helpful perspective shift. I'm definitely someone who gets frustrated when I feel like I'm not progressing fast enough. So this idea of productive struggle is actually really reassuring.
Yeah, it's all about reframing those moments of frustration as moments
Mm.
of learning. And while we're on the topic of pushing ourselves, I want to mention another technique that might seem a bit old-fashioned, but reading aloud.
Reading aloud. Wow, I haven't done that since I was a kid. How does that help with fluency?
Well, research has shown that reading aloud is actually incredibly beneficial for improving your fluency, your pronunciation, your intonation. It helps you develop a smoother, more confident speaking voice by actually practicing those sounds, those rhythms.
So it's not just about reading silently in my head, it's about actually voicing the words, engaging my vocal cords. What kind of material should I be reading aloud?
Anything that interests you. Articles, short stories, even dialogue from a movie script. The key is to practice speaking in those longer coherent sentences, to focus on your rhythm and your intonation. It's like giving your voice a workout.
This is making me realize how much I've neglected the power of my own voice in language learning. I'm definitely going to start incorporating reading aloud into my practice. So we've got task-based learning, productive struggle, reading aloud. Am I sensing a theme here? It seems like all of these techniques involve, taking action and actively using the language rather than just passively studying it.
You're exactly right. And that brings us to another really fascinating concept, gamification.
Gamification.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
like turning language learning into a game. I mean, I actually love playing those language learning apps on my phone. So
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear more about this.
It's amazing. It's amazing how motivating those apps can be. And research has shown that incorporating those game-like elements into learning, it can really dramatically increase
Hmm.
your engagement and motivation. So think about those points, those levels, those challenges that those apps use, right? They tap into our natural desire for rewards, for achievement.
It's so true. I get way more excited about completing a lesson when I know I'm going to earn like a virtual badge
Mhm.
or unlock a new level. It feels like I'm actually like making progress and having fun at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you can incorporate gamification into your own learning even without an app. You could set up challenges for yourself, you could create like a reward system or even just find ways to make your practice sessions more interactive and enjoyable.
I love that. It's about bringing back that sense of playfulness,
Yeah.
right? And making language learning feel less like a chore and more like an adventure. Okay, so we're taking action. We're embracing those challenges. We're finding ways to make learning fun. This is all great for when we're feeling motivated, but what about those times when we hit a plateau or we feel like giving up?
Yeah, those moments are totally normal, and that's where self-reflection can be incredibly powerful.
Self-reflection. What do you mean by that?
Taking some time to think about your learning process,
Hmm.
to identify what's working well, what needs improvement. And one really great way to do this is by keeping a language journal.
Oh, I've always enjoyed journaling, but I never thought to use it for language learning.
Yeah.
How can a language journal help me with staying motivated?
Well, it can help you track your progress, identify those patterns in your learning, and celebrate your achievements. I mean, think about it. If
Yeah.
you're feeling discouraged, you can look back through your journal and see how far you've come, right? And you might be surprised at how much you've actually learned.
It's like having this written record
Hmm.
of your language learning journey.
Yeah.
And not just, the successes, but also the challenges and how you overcame them. That can be really motivating when you're feeling stuck.
Exactly. And beyond the motivational benefits, a journal can also it can help you identify areas where you might need to focus more attention,
Hmm.
right? Are you consistently struggling with a certain grammar point? Are you making progress with your pronunciation? By tracking your journey, you gain these valuable insights into your strengths, your weaknesses, and that allows you to tailor your practice more effectively.
So it's like having a personal learning coach,
Yeah.
like right there in your back pocket. I'm sold. So we're reflecting on our progress. We're embracing challenges. We're finding ways to make learning fun. I'm starting to see a pattern here. It's not just about mastering the language. It's also about mastering like our own learning process.
You're absolutely right. It's about becoming a more conscious learner, a more intentional learner. And that actually brings us to another fascinating concept, mindful listening.
Mindful listening. Okay, I'm familiar with mindfulness in general, but how does that apply to language learning? I mean, I listen to English podcasts and music all the time, but I wouldn't say I'm doing it mindfully.
Right. It's about shifting from that passive listening to active listening. So instead of just letting those sounds kind of wash over you, you're consciously focusing on those sounds and meanings of the words, without judgment, without distraction.
So it's about being present in the moment with the language.
Yeah.
How does that actually help me learn?
Well, when you listen mindfully, you start to pick up on those subtle nuances in pronunciation, in tone, in rhythm
Yeah.
that you might have missed before. It's like you're training your ears to become more attuned to the music of the language.
This is making me realize how much I've been on autopilot with my listening. I'm
Mm.
I'm usually like doing something else while I'm listening to a podcast. I'm not really fully engaged. I'm excited to start practicing mindful listening and see how it impacts my understanding. Okay, so we're mastering our learning process. We're training our ears. But one of the biggest challenges I face, honestly, is remembering all the new words and phrases that I'm learning. It can feel like I'm taking two steps forward and then one step back.
You're not alone in that feeling. And that's where spaced repetition, which we touched on earlier, it becomes truly invaluable. It's such a game changer for vocabulary learning that it deserves a little more of our attention.
Okay, yeah. Remind me again how spaced repetition actually works. Is it just about reviewing vocabulary words every day?
It's a little more strategic than that. Spaced repetition is based on the principle that we forget things over time unless we actively revisit them. But instead of reviewing everything at the same frequency, spaced repetition schedules those reviews at increasingly longer intervals. So you might review a word the day after you learn it, then 3 days later, then a week later, and so on.
So it's not just about cramming a bunch of vocabulary words into my brain all at once. It's about strategically reviewing them at specific intervals to make sure they actually stick. In my long-term memory, that sounds much more effective and honestly less overwhelming than trying to remember everything perfectly right away.
Exactly, exactly. And thankfully, there are fantastic apps out there like Anki that do all the scheduling for you. So you input your vocabulary words or phrases, and the app uses an algorithm to determine when you need to review each word based on your performance.
So it's like having a personal vocabulary trainer that knows exactly when I need a refresher. I love that. So we're incorporating spaced repetition, practicing mindful listening, journaling about our progress. Man, this deep dive has already given me so many practical and actionable techniques to try.
It's amazing how much research and insight has gone into understanding the most effective ways to learn a language, and we've only just scratched the surface. But before we dive into even more fascinating techniques, I think it's time for a short break, just to let all this information sink in.
Agreed. Agreed. We've covered so much ground already. It's important to give our brains a chance to process all this new knowledge. We'll be back soon with even more powerful strategies to help you unlock your full English fluency potential. Okay, we are back and ready to wrap up this English fluency deep dive. Before the break, we were talking about spaced repetition, and honestly, it feels like a game changer for actually remembering everything we're learning.
It really is a powerful technique, and it really highlights the importance of actively working with the information you're taking in, you know? And that reminds me of another strategy that combines both visual and auditory learning, watching English media with subtitles.
Okay, yeah, I've definitely done that before.
Yeah.
Usually, just for fun. But how does watching with subtitles actually help with learning?
Well, it's more than just passively enjoying the show, right?
Mhm.
Research has found that seeing those written words while simultaneously hearing them, it actually reinforces, vocabulary, sentence structures in a real world context. So it's like giving your brain a double dose of comprehension. Plus you're picking up on, that natural pronunciation and intonation.
So instead of just zoning out in front of the TV, I should be like actively paying attention to the language, maybe even, rewinding or looking up words I don't understand.
Exactly, exactly. You're turning watching TV into a much more active learning experience. And speaking of active learning, let's talk about storytelling.
Yeah.
Being able to confidently tell a story in English. It's a real sign of fluency, wouldn't you say?
Oh, absolutely. But honestly, the idea of telling a story in another language,
Mm.
it kind of makes me freeze up. I'm not exactly like a natural storyteller,
Mm.
even in my native language.
That's all right. Storytelling is a skill, and you can absolutely develop it with practice. And the research, it encourages us to look for those opportunities to tell stories in English. And you don't have to start with these like epic tales, right? Even simple anecdotes from your day-to-day life. Those can be a great starting point.
So it's not about suddenly becoming Shakespeare. It's just about getting comfortable expressing myself in a narrative form. I guess the more you practice, the easier it becomes to find the words and to structure your thoughts.
You got it. You got it. It's
Yeah.
it's about finding your voice in English and sharing your experiences. And that actually brings us to, I think, a really, really crucial point. Embracing real life challenges.
Okay, what do you mean by real life challenges? Like, give me some examples.
Sure, sure. It could be something small, like ordering food at a restaurant,
Yeah.
asking for directions, or it could be something bigger, like giving a presentation or attending a social gathering where everyone is speaking English.
So it's about putting myself out there,
Yeah.
pushing past my comfort zone,
Mm.
and actually using the language.
Yeah.
In those real world situations. Yeah, I can definitely see how those experiences, while maybe a bit nerve-wracking, would really accelerate my learning.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. You're forced to think on your feet, to adapt.
Yeah.
And that's where real fluency is born.
Wow. This whole deep dive has been such a whirlwind of information,
Right.
but in the best way possible. I'm feeling so inspired. Me too. Me too. It's been amazing to see how much research exists on language learning and how many different approaches we can take. What stands out to me is that it's not just about, memorizing rules and vocabulary. It's about making language learning an active and engaging and honestly an enjoyable experience.
I completely agree. And that brings me to one final thought, the importance of personalization. We've covered over 40 techniques in this deep dive, but not every technique is going to be equally effective for every learner.
Right. That makes sense. I mean, everyone learns differently. So how do I know which techniques are right
Uh,
for me?
It's about figuring out what resonates with you, with
Yeah.
your learning style, your interests, your goals. Don't be afraid to experiment. Try different approaches. Pay attention to what feels effective, what keeps you motivated, what helps you learn and remember information.
That's such an empowering message. It takes the pressure off of feeling like there's only one right way to learn a language. It's about finding what works for me
Yeah.
and creating my own unique path to fluency.
Exactly. Exactly. And remember, learning a language, it's a journey. It's not a race. There will be ups and downs, moments of frustration, moments of triumph. So celebrate every small victory, embrace every challenge as an opportunity for growth, and never lose sight of the joy and the wonder that come with exploring a new language.
So well said. And on that note, I think it's time to wrap up our English fluency deep dive.
I've really enjoyed this conversation. It's been inspiring to see your passion for learning, and I have no doubt that you'll achieve your fluency goals with all this new knowledge.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm feeling so energized, so motivated to put all of these techniques into practice. To everyone listening, remember that the power to unlock your English fluency potential, it lies within you. Embrace the adventure, personalize your approach, and never stop exploring the beautiful world of language.
Until next time, happy learning.